I'm Chidebe Ibe. I'm a Nigerian medical illustrator, working with Harvard Medical School and also the founder of Project Create. I'm excited to be on this conversation with Just for Men Africa.
Can you tell us a bit about your journey growing up and how you became interested in medicine and art?
I mean, I had an interest in medicine from when I was very young. From like that was my first passion to while growing up, like I wanted to become doctors and engineers and all of that. But then I think 2020, 2011, when I lost my mom to cancer. So that particular event in my life kind of gave me more reasons to chase a career in medicine. And then back then I was always very artistic. I was creative. I had a passion for anything creative. So I met a friend of mine who was an artist too. And just a bit to learn from him, I looked at what he was always creating. I started drawing too. On and on, I realized that this is something I love doing, something I could lose track of time creating art. So I started drawing a lot of artworks, portraits for clients and all of that. And so that's how I started arts. And then for medicine, I've always loved medicine, but then losing my mom to cancer was the more reason why I actually, decided to go into medicine.
At what point did you realize that medical illustration could be your path?
I didn't know what's going to be my path. So as earlier said, part of my skills then was always anything artistic. I was a photographer, I was an animator, a lot of things, and a graphic designer. So 2020, I reached out to this group on Facebook and I wanted to work for them to create designs for them. And for like and I was going to be paid for it anyway. So that I received a prompt response that there was no money to pay, and then I obliged to working for them pro bono. So in that journey of working with them, I met my mentors at then, Dr. Ulrich, which he saw my artworks and said, why not? And my interest in medicine, I was like, why not go into medical illustrations? And then I never knew what that was. I had to make research about medical illustrations and what it entailed as a whole. So I realized that, okay, then because then I wasn't a medical student and I didn't know much about medicine as a whole. So it was difficult creating this art. So I had to teach myself anatomy, teach myself how to create these illustrations. And I realized that, oh, this is something I really love doing. And not just that, but, creating more black skin illustrations and all. That's when I realized that, okay, I think I love challenges. So I started doing this artwork because they were challenging. And then there were things I love doing as of then.
What was your reaction when you saw the world responding to your work?
It's really profound and humbling because part of my journey has never been to rise to fame or to get my artwork known by anyone. It has always been solely strictly on representation and strictly about just me putting my artwork out there. And then when I created that art and it went viral, I had to sit down to understand what's really going on, why it is actually going viral. But then I understand that it was at a time where it was much needed, where statistics were rising about maternal health, and then people could relate with it personally. And then something I got to learn later on in my journey was that piece of art was medically controversial, if I'm going to say that, because most people in medicine always get to know that a fetus is always white. Fetus are never black in the utero. Being that the first time they ever saw something that seemingly was controversial and that felt controversial, kind of sparked a lot of conversation. Like that never such has never existed in medicine at all. So it was really a humbling moment realizing that I'm leading a big conversation in healthcare. And then I think on and on has been a very fruitful and and a blessed journey.
Why do you think representation of Black bodies in medical education has been lacking for so long?
I think if we take a step back towards the history of medicine, um, history of medicine, where medicine was always like the white kind of thing, where originated, and from the Western world and all of that. You know, um, the founders of contemporary illustrations, for example, like Max Bodo, Frank Nater, were all white people, and then at the time, maybe it was not a conscious thing, but they kept creating artworks that represented their own skin color, and then people built their experience upon that. Ever being introduced to images where all what was white, people now thought about what does this represent on Black people because, you know, it's that was what was given to them from inception, and then unbeknownst to them, it kind of perpetuated some implicit bias where you have this unconscious prejudice towards a certain population. For example, where research showed that Black people have nerve ending that are less sensitive to pain, meaning that we have high tolerance for pain. Because of this implicit bias, when a mother goes to the hospital and complains about her pains are being ignored, or when sickle cell patient complain about pain, you know, these things are unconsciously, perpetuating stereotype in healthcare. So it didn't understand that this was the foundation of why this thing started, because we never got to see this on Black people. And then when Black people present themselves with complaint, we assume they are just drug seekers, And then if we take a step back to an area of medicine like dermatology, where we have skin conditions for different races, you know, and then sometimes we have, I think that was in 2020, where medical students in Nigeria asked, what does heat rash look like on a Black skin, and they said it looked reddish on a Black skin, which of course it's impossible, to see redness sometimes on a Black skin because of the melanin. But the medical students in Africa are being trained to identify redness on Black people, because this was how these images, kind of perpetuated uh, you know, because medical students in Nigeria all use textbook from the Western world, like the popular medical textbooks they all use. So because of this information, because of not having textbooks that represent certain community or our community rather, that's what led to those lack of representation in healthcare, and that's what I always talk about. It's important to diversify learning, our materials, our literature should cover population that they learn that they represent.
Are your illustrations being used in hospitals and schools around the world?
Well, I would say that it's difficult. Nigeria hasn't adapted yet. I mean, I have not really had any sort of um, conversation or business, in terms of with Nigerian community. It's really, I would say Africa as a whole generally. Maybe they haven't really understood why this is necessary, you know, and then, but the medical system that I've really adopted my work. It's like in the Western world, US, Canada, the UK, and all of that. Europe basically have adopted and seen the importance of the kind of work that I do. And then they've also had cases where medical systems where had to like review their curricula and how um what the curricula they use to training medical students. So yes, I've seen the impact in other parts of the world outside of Africa, and I don't know when the change will be in Africa, but I think that's why we need these conversations every day to ensure that people understand that this is a thing that's lacking in Africa, and it's important because I mean, how can medical students in Africa, in Nigeria particularly, belaying conditions that represent on white people. I know sometimes we think it does not, it's not important, but it is very important because we are training ourselves to have this unconscious prejudice towards certain population, and it's so profound.
What challenges have you faced as a young African gaining global attention in this space?
I think part of the thing that I said in the prayer was like the acceptance. I've had times where people ask me questions like, "Why is this important? Is this necessary? Why do we need illustrations?" And I know that I've always known that change begin with resistance. People would always talk about why is this necessary? We are okay with all images being all white centered. But as a young person, part of the things I've encountered was that I am too young to be the one leading this change. I've had series of backlashes from people. At the peak of my career, I had times where people threatened me not to come to their country. People literally tried to take down my Instagram account, you know, because of the hate of being a young person and being an African. And I mean, seemingly, I'm not the first medical illustrator. There are a lot of illustrators out there, But then being that I'm a Nigerian, I'm a young person, there was a whole lot of hatred from the art community, being a young person and all of that. But then it was really a rough process for me. But then I had to I think it would help me build that resilience and understand that, um, these things are normal when you're trying to do something different in the world at large. So yeah, it is really difficult. And then part of the thing is also that I'm more like an independent artist. I'm not part of any organization or art community and whatever. And then sometimes it kind of impacts, people are like, oh, he's not part of our community and all of that. So, um, but I guess we keep the work going.
What is the process when creating your illustrations?
So currently, right, I think before the call, I was actually drawing. I was working on Caesarean section. And then I had thought about this artwork 2 weeks ago. And then, so that's to say, that is the first step for my art creation. I think about my artworks before creating them. So I spend a lot of time having like a mental picture or like having picturing or more like having a visual board of what artwork should be like. So I spent like more like a week on that already. So I already know what to create when on my drawing tablet. And then, so it goes with by choosing maybe a particular topic, let's say it's a section, or let's say placenta preview and all of that. And then once I decide on that, I decide the concept to which the art would represent. Do I want to represent this on different races? Because part of my artwork recently has always been to represent it um, on different skin tone, or I choose to represent on black skin. So that is also what I do. I decide on, and then when I go my tablet, I begin to sketch out the model. So because for me, modeling is very important because, for example, now I want to create an artwork for cesarean section. I mean, cesarean section just basically consists in the uterus, but then the uterus is in a person, right? And then it's cesarean section are lived experience for mothers. So that's to say that I don't only try to draw just the anatomy or the inside of the body. I try to represent it on a human being that, oh, this is a lived experience of a person. So that's why modeling is. So I create my modeling, and then I sketch the anatomy, where it's needed, and then outlining and coloring and all of that. Then I usually do not post my artwork that same day. I leave it like a day before, a day after to post, because I want to give it a second eye to look at it before, in case there are things I have missed, there are errors and all of that. So in my years of my early years of career when I was growing up, my mentor that then was the one who always reviewed my artwork. Dr. Orig, yeah, I would share with him. He would look at it and like no, make these and all of that. But then as I've grown to understand the systems of art, how art works and being more of an independent artist. So most things I do now are self-rated. So I make sure that I go through all the materials, all the research, make sure that everything is correct before sharing them. So that's pretty much how I create my art.
Which of your illustrations has gained a lot of attention?
I guess it's probably the Black Widows illustration. That has been the most iconic artwork, but not like it's my favorite. I mean, it grew to becoming my favorite, but then based on my creation, it wasn't my favorite at then, and the most interesting thing is that every year the image keeps going viral. And I don't know, I mean, there is just something, profound about art that it keeps going viral every year. So I would say it's the Black Fetus is the one that keeps, growing and keeps gaining ascendance.
What has been part of a new African narrative mean to you?
Someone I know so closely, a friend of mine, Tunde Onokoya, which is a chess grandmaster. He's often always said that it's possible to do great things from small places. Meaning that irrespective of where you are, your environment, it's possible to do great things. And being from, I mean, coming from a very small community in Nigeria, and then rising to a global level has been exceedingly God's blessings, and then seeing how far I've been here, and not just that, promoting Africa to the global stage has been so profound. And then one thing I've also noticed is that I have been a source of motivation for young African people. I've had people who reach out to me for mentorship, for some sort of encouragement, for tutelage to guide them on medical illustrations or their career path, how to discover their purpose. I've had cases where young people just reach out to me and for all of that. So leading the, also being part of the African narrative, leading African, the African story, to the global stage is it's really a humbling experience, a humbling journey. And then it just goes to show that, Africa is just a place where we have raw and unidentified talent that we need people to cultivate. So yeah, it's just really for me just a blessing.
What impact do you hope your work will have in the next 10 to 20 years?
I've always thought about it as when I flip through medical textbooks internationally used medical textbook, I want to see a lot of diversity in medical textbooks, not just about my illustration, but then that I want to see that, like I want to get to the point where medical publishers or medical schools have come to understand that this is imperative for us to review how we write our textbooks. So in 10 years to come, as I flip through textbooks, I just want to see a lot of diverse images. You know, I also want to see how we can eliminate structural racism in medicine, eliminate implicit bias in medicine through visual creation, because when people see these things, they begin to understand that these are real patients and real life experiences, and they begin to treat patients properly. So in years to come, these are the things I want to do. And then lastly, I would say that because now if we Google on the internet, let's say for example, heat rash, you're mostly going to see a lot of white images. So in 10 years to come, I want to see how on going through Google search, there's a whole lot of diversity. There's a whole lot of um, it's going to be a system where we get to have control of what we want to see, or what sort of results we want to get through because of these images having populated on the internet. There's a lot of diverse visual, a lot of diverse medical illustrations, and not just that, but animations too. And then so in things to come, if that happens, I don't think we'll have an issue of saying, oh, there's lack of representation because that will already be settled. We'll look at solving other complex problems, in the future.
Do you plan on being an illustrator full time and leaving being a doctor behind?
A lot of people have asked me that question, but um, I know, and it's happening recent times where a lot of doctors are quitting their jobs now, and maybe going to content creation and all of that. But it's all based on personal decision and personal journey. For me, I do not think I'm going to quit medicine. I'm going to full-time art because it's both field have an intersection. So because for me, art is what I use to relieve my stress, create, an impact in society, and as much as medicine also helping me do that. But then I think it's really important to carry both. So I don't think I'm going to quit medicine or art for the other. I'm just going to carry them until my strength fails me.
What advice would you give to young Africans who want to combine science and creativity?
I think that's really a beautiful question because a lot of people say you can't do science and creativity. They have to either be a creative person or be a science person. But the question would be, what is science without creativity? Because every science creation was, best said from a creative point. So, and I've always said in medicine, I believe that art should be integrated as a prerequisite or maybe as an elective to medical students because art just doesn't just teach you how to um, create art, but how to see things in a different dimension or how to view patient. Art is so therapeutic in terms of healthcare outcomes and all of that. So I would say that both are not too they're not mutually exclusive. These are very important fields that should be combined. Because for me in the medical space, I've had time. I've thought objectively because of art and studied because of art. So it's I believe that there are two fields that can be combined accurately and adequately.